Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. Today we are diving into something that's causing a lot of waves
Mm,
in the global economy, and that is the increasing trade tensions between
the US and China.
the U.S. and China.
Mhm.
You guys sent in some really, really interesting stuff, and
Absolutely.
at the center of all of it is former President Trump's uh, revived threat
Yeah.
of some pretty hefty tariffs on Chinese goods
Yes.
and the potential domino effect this could have.
It's a big one.
It's a big one. Our mission in this deep dive is to really try to get a grasp on what's been happening,
Right.
what could happen, and just look at it from, all sides.
Yeah, this is a pivotal moment for
Mm.
sure. I mean, what we're potentially looking at
Yeah,
is a significant ratcheting up of trade friction,
right.
and the implications uh, could be felt really, really far and wide. So let's jump right in.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The source material lays it out pretty clearly. Trump is proposing a possible 50% tariff on all goods
Right.
coming into the U.S. from China. Now, that number alone is huge. But it's really important to understand that we're not starting at zero here.
Right.
This would be on top of existing tariffs.
Exactly. And when you factor in those existing levies as the source material details,
Yeah.
the total tariff on some Chinese products could reach a staggering 104%.
Wow.
I mean, to put that in perspective, that kind of cumulative increase could completely change the economics of trade for a lot of goods,
Right.
making them drastically more expensive.
104%. That's just, wow. It really shows how these layers of tariffs can add up to create a massive barrier.
Yeah.
And to give us some context, this isn't coming out of nowhere. The source reminds us of Trump's previous announcement
Right.
of a 34% global tariff, which he called his Liberation Day policy.
Hmm.
It seems like this latest threat is part of a larger strategy.
It does seem that way. This isn't just an isolated incident.
Yeah.
That earlier global tariff announcement definitely signaled a more aggressive stance on trade.
Yeah.
And China's response to that was, as we've seen before in these types of situations.
China didn't wait around. They immediately imposed a 34% counter tariff on U.S. goods. It's that classic tit for tat.
Yeah,
But like you said, it feels like things are moving a lot faster this time.
it does.
Yeah.
And then Trump went on Truth Social and set that Tuesday deadline for China to essentially back down.
Yeah.
And he delivered that very blunt ultimatum.
Right. That statement, all talks with China will be terminated. That doesn't really leave much room for diplomacy, does it?
No, it doesn't. It's a pretty strong declaration.
Yeah.
And from China's perspective,
Right.
as seen in the Chinese embassy's statement calling these actions economic bullying and examples of unilateralism and protectionism,
Right.
they obviously feel targeted and unfairly treated. This really highlights the completely different ways both sides are looking at this issue.
And that brings us to what's really at stake here. The source material outlines some potentially huge consequences.
Yeah.
For China, their biggest exports to the U.S., things like electronics, machinery, furniture, even the toys we buy, could become so expensive that American consumers and businesses just start looking elsewhere.
Exactly. Their largest export market would basically become way less viable.
Right.
And for American companies that rely on these Chinese imports for their own production or retail,
Right.
they'd be hit with much higher costs,
Yeah.
which would probably be passed on to you, the consumer,
Yeah.
in the form of higher prices for everyday goods.
So you could see price tags going up on everything, from your new phone to a new couch, even your kids' favorite toys.
Exactly.
And for the Chinese manufacturers who depend on the U.S. market, this could mean a big drop in demand
Yeah.
and some serious economic pain. It feels like everyone could end up losing in this scenario.
It does. And the immediate reaction from the financial markets really shows the level of concern and uncertainty this has caused globally.
Oh, absolutely. The source paints a clear picture of markets taking a real hit on that Monday.
Yeah.
We saw some pretty big drops across major indices.
What's really striking is how big those declines were. I mean, the Hong Kong Hang Seng plummeting 13%.
Wow.
Its worst day since 1997 really shows the anxiety in Asia, a region that's so closely tied to global trade.
Right.
That kind of drop signals major investor fear about the immediate impact on business confidence and trade volumes in that crucial part of the world.
That is a massive drop. And it wasn't just Hong Kong, the FTSE 100 in London, the DAX in Germany,
Right.
and even our own S&P 500 all saw significant falls over 4% in each case.
Yeah.
It really highlights how interconnected the global economy is
Yeah.
and how sensitive it is to these kinds of major trade disputes.
Absolutely. While there was a bit of a rebound in some Asian markets on Tuesday,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, that initial sharp drop is a strong indicator
Right.
of the underlying nervousness and the potential for things to keep swinging back and forth as this situation develops.
And it's not just short-term market jitters. The source includes a pretty serious warning from analysts,
Yeah.
comparing this to a potential 1930s-style trade war. That's a pretty worrying comparison.
It is.
It makes you think about a time of severe global economic contraction and hardship.
That historical comparison is a strong reminder of the potential long-term damage that prolonged and escalating trade barriers can have
Right.
on global economic growth. And that quote from the trader calling this economic brinkmanship really captures the high-stakes game that seems to be going on.
Economic brinkmanship. That's a perfect way to put it. It feels like both sides are really pushing the limits.
It does.
And it's not just the US and China that are anxiously watching this play out. The source highlights how other countries are reacting
Right.
and trying to figure out how to deal with this increasingly complicated situation.
Yeah, these kinds of trade disputes have ripple effects all over the world, and different countries are thinking about their own positions and strategies to try and minimize any potential damage to their economies.
We see Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu making a point of promising to eliminate trade imbalances with the U.S. very quickly.
Yeah.
It seems like a preemptive move to avoid getting caught in the middle of these wider tariff policies.
It does. It suggests a real concern about the potential for more widespread tariffs.
Right. And then you have the EU's Ursula von der Leyen proposing a zero-for-zero tariff deal.
Right.
That sounds like a direct attempt to de-escalate the situation and maybe offer a different approach to trade relations based on getting rid of tariffs altogether.
What's particularly interesting is her saying that the EU would be open to retaliation if a deal isn't reached.
Yeah.
It shows that other major economic blocs are ready to defend their interests.
Right.
And they're not just going to accept unilateral tariff actions without considering their own responses.
But Trump's stance, as the source emphasizes, remains pretty firm. We're not pausing tariffs. It's America first.
Yeah.
That really underlines his unilateral approach and his focus on what he sees as American interests as the top priority in these trade negotiations.
Right. His justification constantly saying that Americas have been played for decades in trade
Yeah.
and that these tariffs are the solution is a common theme in his talk about trade.
Yeah.
While this resonates with some first, it also gets a lot of pushback from those who support different trade policies.
And those criticisms, as the source points out, often focus on the potential for increased inflation,
Right.
making things more expensive for everyone, and the risk of the U.S. becoming more isolated on the global stage, potentially weakening its influence and relationships with key allies. It's a big debate with big implications for how the U.S. interacts with the rest of the world.
Absolutely. There are clearly very different views on the effectiveness and the broader economic and geopolitical consequences of using these types of aggressive tariff measures.
So with all this happening, the big question everyone's probably asking is what's next?
Yeah.
The source rightly points out that everyone's watching Beijing right now.
Exactly. China's reaction to this new tariff threat is the key next step.
Yeah.
Will they decide to give in a bit to try and calm things down and avoid these much higher tariffs? Or will they choose to hit back with their own measures,
Right.
potentially making the trade conflict even worse?
And the general feeling among experts, as the source suggests, seems to be that while neither side probably wants a full-blown trade war, with all the widespread economic damage that would come with it, the risk of a miscalculation in this highly charged environment is really high.
Yeah, that's a crucial point.
Yeah.
In situations like this where the rhetoric gets really heated
Yeah.
and firm deadlines are set, the margin for error gets much smaller.
Mm-hmm.
A wrong move by either side could accidentally lead to further escalation that neither party wanted in the first place.
The source lays out some of the possible consequences if Trump's proposed 50% tariff actually happens.
Right.
We're talking about a likely breakdown of any current trade negotiations,
Yeah.
which at that point would seem almost inevitable,
Yeah.
and a major disruption to the complex global supply chains that drive so much of international trade.
Right.
Businesses that rely on a smooth and predictable flow of goods across borders would face huge problems.
Yeah.
You can think of supply chains like intricate networks that coordinate the journey of a product from raw materials to the final consumer.
Yep.
Tariffs act like roadblocks in that journey. And like we talked about earlier, the impact on the consumer could be pretty direct and painful,
Right.
with the prices of a wide range of goods, from everyday electronics to bigger purchases like furniture and even cars,
Yeah.
very likely to go up significantly.
It's a real concern.
So for individuals and investors trying to make sense of this economic landscape, the advice seems to be to brace for continued volatility in the markets
Right.
as this situation keeps developing.
Yeah.
It definitely doesn't sound like a very stable economic outlook.
No, it doesn't. That's a fair assessment. The uncertainty around big shifts in trade policy always has a direct and often unsettling effect on market stability.
Well, this has definitely been a deep dive into a very complex and rapidly changing situation. Just to quickly recap, we've looked at Trump's escalating threat of tariffs against China,
Yeah.
the possibility of those tariffs going over 100% on some goods, China's immediate retaliation,
Right.
the significant turmoil we've seen in global financial markets as a direct result,
Uh-huh.
the reactions from other countries trying to navigate this turbulent situation,
Yeah.
and the considerable uncertainty surrounding what China will do next.
Exactly. The key takeaways are the sheer size of the proposed tariff increases,
Right.
the immediate negative reaction we saw in global markets,
Yeah.
which shows widespread worry,
Yeah.
and the delicate and potentially unstable situation we're in with the real possibility of major economic disruption,
Right.
depending on the choices made by both the U.S. and China going forward.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a final thought for you to chew on.
Okay.
Given the potential for serious economic pain for everyone involved
Right.
and the stated goal of achieving perceived strategic advantages,
Yeah.
what do you think is the most likely long-term outcome of this escalating trade tension? Is this the start of a fundamental change in global trade relationships?
Huh?
Or will economic pragmatism ultimately win out and lead to a de-escalation? It's definitely something to keep a close eye on.
It is, for sure.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Absolutely.
We'll be back next week with a brand new deep dive into a fresh topic.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, stay curious.
Yeah, stay informed.
And keep exploring.